All right, so the next section of our lab report is the data section. So once again, we'll start with that same question. What is the purpose of the data section? All right. The data section allows the reader to see the raw data. I do want to make one distinction here before we go on and talk about data specifically, and that is between these two things, data and results. Okay. If we're getting technical, and I'm not going to nitpick that much as long as all of it's there. I don't care as much about what you call it. But if we're getting technical, data represents the things that you measured. Okay, the raw data that you measured. The results represent what you did with those measured values, the things you calculated, your analysis, your graphs, things of that nature. So they are kind of two parts. We tend to kind of merge them into a data and results section. And really, it's semantics. It doesn't matter that much. But what this part is going to deal with specifically is just the displaying the data that you collected in the lab. So we're going to display, almost always we're going to display our data in a data table. All right. And the whole point of this is to just give a visual representation of our what we actually measured, okay, in an easy manner. There's a few purposes for this. One, people want to see what your raw data was before you did it, to make sure that you didn't make a mistake, but also sometimes people will take that data and use it for some other purpose. So we want to have all that raw data in a table or some other graphic organizer. Like I said, it's almost always going to be a table. There might be one or two exceptions. The key is to have it be clear and easy to read. So we're going to talk about a lot of different things, but as long as your data table is clear and easy to read and it includes a title and units, all right, the rest of it is really stylistic choices. You have to have units, you have to have a title, it has to be clear and easy to read, but how you actually go about making a clear and easy to read data table could vary. This obviously is a little bit of a judgment call. Some things though that are nice that I put down here, bolding headers, including grid lines, that makes it easier to read. There is a standard way of naming tables, and that is you put table and then the number of the table starting with 1 as you're going through your report, and then a title, and it always goes above the table. That's not something I'm going to nitpick about. That's not that big of a deal. That's just a stylistic thing. You're usually only going to have one data table. There are some circumstances where you would need more than one. One would be if there were multiple parts to the lab. So maybe you were testing 2 or 3 different independent variables, in which case you would make 2 or 3 different data tables to display all your raw data for each variable. Also, if there's some other reason why it just doesn't make sense to put it all together, if there's some natural split, if it's a huge amount of data, all these could be reasons why you might divvy it up. All right, that's really going to be more on a case-by-case basis, but in general you're only going to have one data table. You don't need to break it up into many different data tables. That's really the more common mistake, is people break it up into too many data tables when it should be one rather than the reverse. Okay. Later on in the lab report, in the results section, you can isolate parts of your data. Sometimes people tend to not include all the data because they want to just focus on the essential data, but you can't do that. You have to include all of your raw data in a data table. And if you then later on want to kind of narrow down the focus to only 2 or maybe 3 variables or 2 or 3 columns within that data table, that's fine. But you must include all of the raw data somewhere. So here we have an example of a data table. Once again, I'm just going to point out some important things. We have a title here for our data table in that standard convention that I was talking about earlier, where it's table and then the number of the table and then the title after that. We have headers for our columns that include units, and that's typically how we do it. And in the video on Excel of how to make a table, I talk about this, but typically we'll have the header name followed by the units in parentheses. You notice I don't then have any units after the numbers, and that's fine because I have them in the header, so it's okay. I've bolded these headers to make it a little bit clearer. We have grid lines to divide this up. All of the numbers are to a good number of decimal places. Sometimes people include way too many decimal places that are really unnecessary, so make sure you're thinking about that. Obviously, the precision of the lab is going to affect how many decimal places you ultimately have, but you should be thinking about that, not just putting a random number. Okay, but overall your data table should look something like this, although the individual style of it could be different, and that's fine. But it should be clear, it has to have units, has to have titles.